The federal election in Canada is underway, and the announcements from contenders are coming fast and furious. One theme that's caught my attention is tax cuts. I've done a couple of other videos about taxes and tax cuts, and you can find those up here somewhere and in the description. I thought it was really timely to talk about these issues again, given that both the Liberals and the Conservatives have said they would cut the base tax rate. That's what this video is about. Why tax cuts are a great idea for part of the Canadian population, and why it's completely wasted on another. And the most important question of all, how will the tax cuts be paid for? Because tax cuts are really, really expensive. All right, we've got dueling tax cut plans. Prime Minister Mark Carney announced on March 23rd a promise to cut the marginal tax rate on the lowest tax bracket by 1%. That would save a dual income family just over $800 a year, and it would cost $6 billion. Poilievre went even further and said Conservatives would cut that same marginal tax rate on the lowest bracket by 2.5%, saving a dual income family a little more than double what the Liberal plan estimates. The Conservative plan will cost $14 billion. Yikes! Poilievre has described taxes as the fine you pay for the crime of working hard. That is so sad and negative and selfish, which in my opinion is right on brand with Conservatives. I think taxes are an investment in societal good for everyone. I see what my taxes buy. Thinking that you're being punished through paying taxes that fund our healthcare system and the climate change fight and all kinds of infrastructure is a horribly selfish perspective. This is why I'm not a fan of Conservatives. So how is all this tax cutting going to be paid for? Well, if you cut government revenue through taxes, then there is one of two things that needs to happen at the same time. Either make up that revenue from somewhere else, or cut the things you spend money on. On the revenue side of the equation, there was a Liberal initiative announced last year that I was actually pretty happy about, an increase in the capital gains tax rate. Take a slightly bigger piece of the gains that wealthier Canadians are making. Sadly, Prime Minister Carney said he'd cancel this planned hike in the capital gains tax, showing once again that wealthy Canadians always end up winning, regardless of which party is in power. Poilievre has said Conservatives would assemble a tax reform task force of entrepreneurs, investors, farmers, and workers to design a tax cut that would lower taxes on energy, work, home building, and investment. I wonder what a group that is mostly made up of entrepreneurs, investors, and farmers would propose for tax reform. That's a lot of Conservative energy in one place, and it's not a wild guess to suggest their plan would have huge cost implications requiring a fairly drastic scaling back of spending. Spending in places that particular group of largely wealthy individuals wouldn't be too fussed up about. Another way to balance out the loss in government revenue from the proposed tax cuts is to increase the marginal tax rate at the highest bracket or two. Poilievre and Carney want to lower taxes for the lowest bracket. I don't think that's a bad idea at all. And I think it's a great idea to help people at the bottom by requiring those at the top to pay more. It's a reasonable thing to do if we really care about helping. Lower the bottom tax bracket and make up that lost revenue by increasing the rate at the top end. But the cynic in me knows this is never going to happen, so cool your jets with the outrage. Let's instead focus on the cutting side of the equation. It is inevitable that this is the route the Conservatives, and to a lesser extent the Liberals, will take to pay for lower tax rates. Both the Liberals and Conservatives haven't really said in any huge detail at this point what they would do exactly, but we do have some clues. Prime Minister Carney has said a Liberal government will rein in wasteful and ineffective government spending and cap the size of the public service. There really isn't a whole lot of other detail at this point. Pierre Poilievre is also a big fan of using the term wasteful government spending, but Conservatives likely have a different definition of that than Liberals do. And usually when Conservatives start cutting, people at the bottom get hurt. Poilievre has previously said that Conservatives would cut the Housing Infrastructure Fund and the Housing Accelerator Fund, defund the CBC, shutter the Canadian Infrastructure Bank, and dramatically reduce foreign aid. I'm seeing some parallels with the US. You? A proposed tax cut that costs a whole buttload of money, and the plan to pay for that heavily leans on government efficiency. Enter Elon Musk and his saluting and chainsawing. US government services are being absolutely gutted to pay for their tax cut through Musk's so-called Department of Government Efficiency. But surely that would never happen here in Canada. Well, hold on a minute. We have the always unbiased Fraser Institute, which published a report in February 2025 that identifies 8 government programs that the authors say are ineffective and should be eliminated to save $10.7 billion. On the one hand, I agree with the general premise that government programs should have clear goals. They should be evaluated to see if they're meeting those goals. And occasionally, the overall strategy should be examined to see if it's still relevant to the problems of the day. We should hold government accountable for the tax dollars they spend on our behalf. But the authors of the Fraser Institute report say these 8 programs should be eliminated because they aren't meeting their goals. Whoa, take a breath, Fraser. How about approaching this as an opportunity to find out why these programs aren't meeting their goals? That's assuming for a moment that goals are not, in fact, being met. It's kind of like some of the things Poilievre has said are wasteful and that he'd cut. Like the Federal Housing Accelerator Fund because not enough homes are getting built. Same question. Why aren't more homes getting built? Is it the fault of the Accelerator Fund? Or does the problem lie elsewhere, like at the municipal level perhaps, where a conservative housing plan would face exactly the same barriers? Why throw away a good program before finding out why it's not working? And cutting the CBC almost completely? I did a video on that up here somewhere. Same question again. If you're not happy with the CBC, then look at reforming it. Not in the conservative image, please, no. But if you think it's inefficient, fix it. Don't throw away a service that millions of Canadians rely on because your real reason is you just don't like how they cover you. So to summarize the parallels with what is happening in the US, Poilievre is talking tax cut, government efficiency to pay for it, cutting foreign aid, defunding CBC because he doesn't like how they cover him. Trump wants to defund public radio in the US as well, and drastically ramping up fossil oil and gas extraction at the same time as eliminating climate change actions. And Poilievre, like Trump, loves his little nicknames for opponents. Trust Fund Trudeau, Carbon Tax Carney, Sellout Singh. It's pretty hard to believe Canada won't be following the same path as the US is now if Conservatives win the next election. We've heard Danielle Smith, the Premier of Alberta, encouraging the US to hold off on their tariffs until after the election because it's hurting Pierre Poilievre's chances of winning, and that Pierre is much more aligned with the new direction in the US. While Danielle Smith seems to like encouraging foreign interference in our election, she does make a point I agree with. Pierre Poilievre does seem to be in sync with the Trump administration in the US. And on March 28th, a conservative strategist in Ontario said Poilievre is acting too Trumpy and needs to make a change or he'll lose. Maybe Poilievre will be able to pivot to appear less Trumpy until just after the election, at which point the fake new persona will be dropped and he'll go back to being who he's shown us to be for years, Mr. Negative, unwilling to stand up for Canada because he likely agrees with a lot of Trump's approach.